Thank you very much. I understand before beginning that I'm a very young person among you, and I do not come from a rigorous historical or literary education background. This project was the result of a private, let's say, research of visual history, and now I will talk to you about my book, and from that I want to go a bit into Jewish-Muslim Dönme relations, and then also give a little summary about the symbols I found while doing this work of research. So let's begin. Who are the Dönme has been a really frequently asked question. We know that they are no stranger to mixed identities. They're always in between one world or the other, and in the present day there's a really, how do you say, sophisticated debate about how to consider them. Are they Muslims? Are they Jews? Are they a unique religion? Are they secular agnostic people who have left religion behind? Or are they a certain intersection of all these groups? Throughout their history, the Dönme were always in between different worlds. This photo supplied to me by my friend Berry Kapancı. He's not here today. I think this photo is an epitome of this mixed identity that the Dönme had, because this is a Dönme girl from the Kapancı family after the takeover of Salonica by Greece. So she is wearing a national Greek costume. She is at least on paper a Muslim and at least ethnically a Jew. So the Dönme, because of their mixed and hidden background, always inhabited the worlds between worlds. And just to talk a bit more about my book, was as was discussed, published in 2014. I do not pretend to be a rigorous historian, so it should be accepted as a visual archive and a visual research about this historical topic. I still think it was a very good deed, because some of these pictures are nearly a century old. Some of them were even destroyed after I started this research, which took 3 years, from 2011 until 2014. And the main subject of the book is the portraits found on the tombstones in Dönme cemeteries. And they're always placed as you see thus. So there is the tombstone, and on a relevant portion there's a porcelain insert with a picture of the dead. And almost always these are signed by the name of Osman Hasan. When I was visiting the cemeteries for recreational purposes, I noticed this signature, and I noticed that nothing had been written or known about this artist. So I set about to myself to collect all of his works and to reveal a body of work by this hitherto unknown photographer of Ottoman history. And Osman Hasan was a very talented photographer. He could really capture the character of his subjects. And if you look at the portraits, the way they stand on the tombstones, the way they mix with the effects of time, and still they are looking at you after all of these centuries, it's very moving. And I felt that there are those among you who know far more about the history of the Dönme or Sabbatean theology or history, but rarely before has anything concrete been attached to this subject. I mean, there were a lot of people who knew about their history, the background, the theology, but this was, I think, the first time a concrete, real, tangible thing related to this group was revealed. And who was Osman Hasan? His signatures feature in almost all of the tombstone pictures from 1890s to 1940s. And throughout my research, I learned that he left no descendants. So all of our information comes from Burhan Yentürk, who lives in Istanbul today, his grandniece. So the dates are very sketchy. We don't know his exact date of birth. We don't know his exact birth of date. In fact, all we know comes from Mr. Burhan Yentürk's information and a few pictures. He made a cameo appearance in Mr. Yentürk's family album. So we know that he died he was born in the very late 19th century in Salonica, came to Istanbul with the 1928 population exchange from Greece. He died sometime in the 1950s. We don't know when, and even though we know the graves of his near relatives, we haven't been able to find his own grave. So that's another area of research that's open. He was the go-to person in the Dönme community for visual and artistic needs. He was also a very talented painter, and throughout, after my research in this book, we also actually discovered a cache of paintings made by Osman Hasan in one of the Dönme family heritage archives, and these portraits are also inside this book. And these are those paintings actually. He had a very sophisticated technique in which he painted over pictures, over photographs. This was a common method in the late 19th century, but he was very skilled in it. And these translated into the tombstone portraits. And it's nice that you don't know where the painting ends and where the photograph begins. It adds a whole new dimension to this artist's work. More of them have been attacked by the ravages of time. On the right you can see, actually we discovered this tomb was destroyed, and this tombstone was buried face down in the mud. And when we lifted it, was a portrait of Udi Ahmet Efendi, who is a very famous musician of Ottoman Salonica. So it's touching all these interesting people's lives. Mostly we don't know much about them, but every once often they are important historical figures. And also, it's interesting to note that in the present day, many people have portraits on their tombstones. So I don't claim that this is a Dönme thing. But the Dönme were the first people to adopt this custom in the nominally Muslim groups of Istanbul in the 1910s, 1920s. And at the same time, the Jews of Istanbul also had this tradition of burying the dead with their photographs. So maybe this is a common sentiment, or maybe it comes from embracing the new technologies at the time. We don't know. But this parallelism opens a very interesting discussion and avenue of research of the Dönme as neighbors of Jews. I compiled some information about how Dönme and Jewish neighbors were close together, but Professor Hadar, I think she showed them earlier, so I'm going to be very brief about this. These were the Greek neighborhoods, the Jewish neighborhoods, and the Muslim neighborhoods of Salonika, and the Dönme inhabited a little cluster of mahalles between the Jewish and the Muslim neighborhoods of Salonika. They were also further subdivided among themselves. The Yakubi, the Kapancı, and the Karakaş had their own different mahalles, and they all existed as part of the Salonican ethnic pizza. And we can, of course, consider that these people lived for centuries in this sort of close proximity, so there must have been lots of interaction between the two communities. Once again, this is a sort of idea of where they lived. This is the Ilan Mermer neighborhood. Obviously, a lot of interesting things must have happened in this world before it burned down in the Great Fire. So we only have personal accounts and writings and memoirs to work from. There are some very interesting little details among the few accounts of Dönme Jewish relationships as neighbors I could find. On the surface, there was a mutual dislike between Dönme and Jewish neighbors due to religious schisms. And for example, it's very similar, the way the Dönme viewed the Jews of the time being 1880s, is very similar to the way Reformed Jews look at Orthodox or more conservative Jews. So here one account says, "From the very scornful way one of them laughed when I spoke of a Jewish funeral, I suspect they do not go to the same excuses as their brethren of Salonika. Such customs such as these, I have every reason to believe the Dönmes have abandoned for the more sober Turkish funeral, which admits no heart-rending scenes and is conducted with more of our Western simplicity." This is from a very interesting article, A Peculiar People, from a magazine in the 1880s by a certain J. Theodore Bent. And this is very similar. I postulate that this is very similar. This may be a result of the secular worldview the Dönme adopted after changing religions. So they may be looking at their religious neighborhoods with the same disdain as a non-religious person looks at a religious member of his or her own creed. And of course, this dislike was mutual. The chief rabbi of Istanbul published a circular labeling the Dönme as frightening immorals, sexual perverts, infidels, honorless, dishonest, blasphemers, tricksters, charlatans, improper financial conductors, and overall unethical, distrustable people. But it is my understanding and hypothesis, let's say, that this hatred was on the surface, and the Dönme and the Jews may have more in common because of their shared customs and shared ways of living that came about over the course of centuries in Salonica and other cities. And in the same article by J. Theodore Bent, for example, they mentioned that the Dönmes come to Jewish houses in Shabbat and cook their foods. So there are interesting scenes of cooperation, and there must be far more friendly or at least amicable encounters among scenes like this. And it's also mentioned that the Jews give the Dönmes employment on Saturdays, and the Christians give employment to Dönmes on Sundays. So once again, they have abandoned religious scruples, but this opened the world of cooperation in the secular and the modern sphere. And actually we see that the family portraits of Dönmes and Jews, at least in the upper classes of late Ottoman Salonica society, were not very dissimilar. You could almost say that they had more in common once they started living a modern life. After the population exchange, the Dönme and the Jews became very close neighbors. From the memoirs of Cüneyt Ayral, we read that the Dönme settled in the neighborhoods of Osman Bey, Nişantaşı, and Maçka, the continuation of Old Pera. And they chose to live together with the Jews especially. Maybe this was their reaction to coming to this new world of the more national, secular, but in a way more conservative and more introverted Turkish Republic. And it's also noted that the Jews and the Dönmes shared a common dislike of the religious, conservative, backwards-looking stereotype that was coming from Anatolia. And like their Jewish neighbors, the Dönme referred to Anatolian immigrants as Vedre. So yeah, this is a ugly part of urban dynamics that happens in every city, but it's interesting to note that the Dönme and the Jews share this together. Also, Kemalism helped find a common cultural ground between the Dönmes and the Jews. And I'm going to be very brief about this issue, that many Dönme families express a great liking of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk because they saw him as a savior from Salonika, and also they saw the Kemalist secular reforms as a way of guarantee of their own secular indigenous lifestyle. But it's very strange that at the same time we also know that the Dönme, like the Jews, suffered more or less a few forms of persecution under the Kemalist regime. So they grudgingly seem to have accepted and become part of this cultural transformation. Once again, this is a Jewish academician describing why he loves Atatürk, and it's very similar to this memoir of Fatma Arı about Kemalism from Leyla Neyzi's book, Sabbateanism, National Identity and Subjectivity in Turkey. I will be very brief. There is still some misinformation present among Turkish Jews about the Dönme. For example, in an interview in 2012, the famous Jewish businessman Isaac Alaton blamed all of the problems of the Turkish Republic on the Salonican Jewish Dönmes. And this is once again a common theme of persecution, but it's very interesting to know that it continues among Jewish people too. But in the more positive side of things, there is some amount of Jewish interest in Dönme or Sabbatean sacred sites. For example, in Avram Galante's book, The History of Anatolian Jews, we see Jewish people visiting the house of Shabbatai Sevi. And in John Freely's Last Messiah, we hear accounts of believers coming to Shabbatai Sevi's house from America or other foreign countries, and it's assumed that these people are Jewish and not Dönmes. And could it be that this place is a place of syncretic rituals for Jewish and Dönme families? For example, Cengiz Şişman's article, in it is mentioned about a certain Cordoso family who would hold a ceremony every year for the death of Shabbatai Sevi, even though they are not Dönmes. But once they were asked again about these rituals, they were suddenly forgotten. I don't remember that. So maybe there was at least a certain sentiment of the heart. So coming on to the more exciting and more interesting for me part is my research in Dönme cemeteries. So we know they fit a template from old Ottoman Salonica, like these pictures. These are the Yenikapı Cemetery in Salonica, and this is Bülbül Deresi in Üsküdar. So they look in a similar way, the marble box with the twin headstones in the foot and the head. And it's very interesting to look at the location of Bülbül Deresi because it stands between the grand Jewish cemetery of Kuzguncuk, seen above in purple, and the great Muslim cemetery of Karacaahmet in green, you see at the bottom. And this is a view of Kuzguncuk, another view of Kuzguncuk with very many interesting decorations, and Mina Rosen did an incomparable work about this cemetery. And this is the view of Karacaahmet, which is also very ornate, even for Ottoman Muslims of the area. It was a burial place for the upper classes. And it's also, Bülbüldere is also very close to a certain dervish lodge of the Özbekler order. So it's geographically, it stands between Muslim and Jewish burial grounds and also that of dervish orders. So maybe they were also, the Dönmes also chose to be in-betweeners in the afterlife, we could ask. And throughout my research, these are the other cemeteries in which I found graves belonging to Dönme families. There were a few in Feriköy. There's a great and very, very under-cared for cemetery in Maçka. Bülbül Deresi is in Üsküdar, of course. In Zincirlikuyu, there are sections, as in Aşiyan, devoted to Dönme families. And we found some similar graves in Pendik, in two different cemeteries, and in the Prince Islands. And from personal interviews, people have told me that there may be Dönme cemeteries or cemeteries with sections for Dönme in cities such as Edirne, İzmir, Antalya, Ankara, and Samsun. And these were all cities settled by emigres from Salonika after the population exchange. So more research needs to be undertaken. But when I was looking at the portraits, another striking thing was the symbolism in Dönme cemeteries, and I think this is where a lot of you could find interesting details. And please, I'm showing these to you as a question rather than answer, because there are, I'm sure, among you those who could answer or find out more about the significance of these symbols. One of the most peculiar things about Dönme cemeteries is these eye tombstones, and I have only seen them in Bülbüldere and Machka, and to my best knowledge, no other Muslim cemetery in Istanbul has them. So these, what are these? They look like eyed gods of the Sumerians, but of course it's a pure coincidence. The hats on the top look like certain dervish hats. So maybe they are meant to be allusion to a certain specific dervish order. And the similarity of the twin circles to the eyes, do they symbolize the two worlds, or watching over the dead in a way, or a sort of even very vague anthropomorphization of the spirit? I don't know. Another interesting symbol is the flower-headed tombstones, and these may be a purely decorative choice, but they are present with overwhelming regularity in Dönme cemeteries. And you do not see them in other Muslim cemeteries in Istanbul. They are very common if you look at these pictures. They are present on the tombs of women as well as men. Sometimes they are used as the frame of the photograph. Are they related to the eyed tombstones? Are they a corruption of this figure? Or is it a symbol of the spirit rising from the grave? Once again, more questions than answers. Also, another very peculiar design comes from the Dönme families buried between 1930s and 1950s, and they specifically chose this very elaborate Art Deco tombs. If you look at them, at the top there's something like a bridge, and at the bottom there's these chevron-like figures with stripes, and these are not a coincidence. Like, for example, the picture on the very right, it comes from a cemetery in Pendik, and this person is a Dönme gentleman, and his wife is buried in Bülbülderesi. That's how I was able to locate him. And in Pendik, this is the only tombstone that looks like that. The others come from Bülbüldere, from Zincirlikuyu, from Feriköy. So there's a distinct pattern there, and what do these mean? I don't know. The bridge could symbolize maybe a crossing from earthly life to afterlife. Or are these leaves somehow an allusion to the Kabbalistic tree of life? We don't know. You're going to be hearing this a lot more. Another very spectacular, and this is the one symbol I could put my money on as being a distinct Dönme only symbol, because nobody has them. The Muslims did not like to put images of animals, of people in their graves. Butterflies. They are present on Dönme tombstones in Bülbülderesi and also two in Feriköy. And they're always near the bottom or at the lower part of the tombstone. And the tombstones themselves have a very interesting geometric pattern. What could these be? I mean, could it mean that the butterfly lives for a day? Could it mean that the butterfly is actually a symbol of the İpek böceği, and it comes from the body as the silkworm changes into the flying version? We know that William Schoeffler in 1851 transcribed the Dönme prayer, and in this prayer there is a mention of the butterfly. The spirit of the god is compared to a silkworm which comes forth from the butterfly, and the butterfly is older than the worm, but the latter has in its turn produced the butterfly, and afterwards, remaining within that, has gone abroad in order to make itself known, and when it has gone abroad, it has become two-winged. Reference on maybe the endlessness and circularity of the God spirit. So if this link is true, it's an interesting link between an actual Dönme liturgy and actual artifacts left behind by this group. More symbols, the arched tombstones. I don't claim that these are a Dönme only symbol, because some Muslim graves also have them, and they seem to be a fashionable trend in post-World War II Turkey. But their columns and the ways in between have been compared to Joachim and Boaz, the columns of the Temple of Solomon. So not very sure, but I wouldn't be surprised, but I wouldn't place money on it either. But still interesting to notice. Another distinct symbol is the repetition of 7 roses. Now, these two come from The one on the left is from the owner of a flower factory, and the one on the right is from the grave of a theater actress named Melek. And always the 7 roses are repeated. What can they represent? Could they be the 7 Sefirot of the Kabbalistic tree of life? Or could they represent the 7 arms of the menorah? Or could they just be a coincidence? I don't know. With symbols, you have to be very careful because it's very easy to go to wild tangents. Flowers of life are also present. Of course, they are present on many other graves. The Muslims also have them, the Christians have them, but the Dönme graveyards have them very, very visibly and very strongly repeated. They are present everywhere. In some cases, they even resemble the Magen David, though that's, I think, another coincidence. But at least in Bülbül Deresi, Dönme graveyards really feature these flowers and wheels of life repeatedly. What can they represent? I don't know. Maybe they are a form of sacred geometry. Maybe it was the fashion at the time. There is some similarity between like this sort of Tudor roses or Roscurian symbols, but once again, people in different places and times really like roses, so I wouldn't place money on that. But about the snakes, this was discussed before. Here's a very interesting, and again, a yılan within a yılan, a snake within a tree, from a graveyard, a singular graveyard carved in the Art Deco style we saw before. It features a serpent descending from a tree and birds trying to attack it, or it's trying to eat a bird, but the tree itself has 11 flowers. So once again, this could be an actual symbolism on behalf of the Dönme. Could they be the Kabbalistic? Could it mean the Kabbalistic tree of life? The numbers could be a reference. The snake certainly is a reference. But too bad we don't have a time machine to go and ask the people who made it. Another very interesting symbol from Bülbüldere Cemetery is the space tomb, in which a lineage of a certain family is linked with Saturn, and the stars coming from it are maybe signifying the descendants of this person. We know that the Hebrew name of Saturn is Shabbatai, and could it mean, because the Dönme believed in reincarnation, could it mean that this person and his kids were reincarnations of Shabbatai Sevi? We don't know. There are 13 stars and 10 planets. These numbers could have a hidden meaning. The planet in brown, I take it to be Jupiter. And could it be a symbol of Zedek or Melchizedek, the sort of wise elder in Old Testament lore? I don't claim to have any answers. Maybe you can help. But one way or the other, this planet Tombstone is one of the most unique physical artifacts left by the Dönme. So future avenues of research. When I was starting my talk, I remarked that I am not a historian or a Jewish studies PhD student or anything. I was just a lucky man with a camera that realized that these things were somehow important. But here are some more avenues of future research. More could be done about oral histories of the Dönme community, or Dönme Jewish or Dönme Sufi relations. More research could be done in other cities about Osman Hasan's portraits in graveyards there. There is a really urgent need to transcribe all the epitaphs in Dönme cemeteries, because these tombs are being destroyed. Nobody's taking care of them, and if people take care of them, acid rain has a way with marble, and in some of them the text cannot be read already. Maybe you could look at the epitaphs with abjad or gematria, and interesting things could be discerned from that. More research is needed on the butterfly symbols, the flower heads, the Eid and the Art Deco tombstones, and that's that. Thank you very much. If you are interested in my book, please help yourselves to copies of the postcards, and you can order copies of my book from Libra Books of Istanbul. Thank you. Any questions?